Welcome to On the Record. I'm Dan Haggerty, joined by NC Capitol reporter extraordinaire Will Doran. So,
thanks, Dan.
I call it as it is, Will. So we've been getting a lot of questions and emails in about the state budget, and the main question is, why don't we have one yet? Can you break down kind of the holdup?
Yeah, we are the only state in our fine nation that does not have a new budget. And basically it all comes down to a fight between the Republicans at the legislature. They control the House, they control the Senate. They could pass something if they wanted to, but they are just fighting amongst themselves.
And it comes down to what? Taxes?
Yes, it is. Well, that's not the only thing, but the main problem is taxes. There was a report last year. We wrote on this. You can find it online at WRL.com. It basically said the state is going to run out of money soon. We're heading towards a deficit, and we can't do deficit spending here in North Carolina because our tax cuts have been too aggressive. And this report was put together by economists from the state government in Democrat Josh Stein's administration, but also by the Republican legislature. This was a bipartisan report, just expert economists who said, hey guys, we need to pump the brakes on some tax cuts. It's getting too aggressive. And the House of Representatives said, okay, yeah, we hear you. Let's do it. The Senate said, no, we don't believe it. We think that's fake news. And we're going to forge ahead not only with the tax cuts that are on the books, but actually want to be even more aggressive and do even bigger tax cuts and basically just say, we're not worried about this. And if we have to, make massive cuts to state spending in the future, then so be it. We'll do that.
Which taxes are we talking about? Is this, business taxes? Are these income taxes across the board?
Yes. So the plan that they have right now is to take corporate income taxes down to zero in a few years. They'll pay nothing. And then for people, just individuals, we'll see just further cuts, not to zero, but lower. And so the question is, okay, do we continue marching forward with this, or do we kind of pump the brakes a little bit? And what the House has proposed is said, okay, let's pump the brakes on these income tax cuts, but instead we'll do some kind of more populist things. We want to bring back the sales tax holiday. People who've been around in North Carolina for a decade or more will remember we used to have basically a back-to-school shopping sales tax holiday, where if, you went and you bought your kids a new backpack, new computer, things like that, you wouldn't have to pay sales taxes on it on this one certain weekend. Well, Republicans actually got rid of that about a decade ago in order to pay for some of their bigger income tax cuts. And that basically, if they brought that back, it would be more helpful towards lower income and middle class people. Whereas the Senate plan, if you focus more on just the income tax rate, that's going to be more helpful to wealthier people, to businesses. So there's also this question more broadly of okay, who do we want to help with our tax policies?
What does the Senate say about where the extra money would come from? So if they're not getting it from taxes, income taxes or business taxes, where they want to get it from?
You would have to cut state spending. We are not like the federal government, which can do deficit spending and go into debt. That is illegal in North Carolina. So if you're not getting the revenue in, you have to either find revenue somewhere else, which, we've been doing with, for example, sports betting. Part of the reason why North Carolina legalized sports betting a couple of years ago was to help keep paying for some of these tax cuts, find some extra revenue, some creative new ways of getting new revenue when we're not getting as much from taxes. But if you can't keep up the revenue stream, and we're a growing state, we need to be hiring more teachers, more state troopers, more prison guards, people like that. And so, you'd have to find cuts somewhere else if the revenue isn't coming in.
Well, I remember, a lot of people can relate to watching our property taxes just go up. And part of that was because all these municipalities looked and said, well, we can't make any cuts. We're growing. We need to afford all of this, so we need more money from your property taxes. Do they have any plan on where they would find that money, where they would cut?
Well, the irony is that, part of the reason why property taxes have gone up is because the state has been putting as much money into schools. And so local counties, which also fund schools, said, okay, well, if the state's not really, where we want them to be, we're going to have to do it ourselves, essentially. But now the legislature is also looking at property taxes. We've been reporting on that the last few days. There's a brand new committee that's basically tasked with figuring out, okay, can we come in and limit what cities and counties are allowed to even charge for property taxes, which, raises other issues of, okay, well, if those are what's paying for schools and police and firefighters, things like that, where is that money going to come from? So there's a whole lot of debates going on right now in state government about everything tax related.
Yeah, and one of the arguments about lowering business taxes is this more incentivizes business to come and set up shop here, or lower income taxes in the state level encourages people to come here and work. I have lived in places that have no income tax. I've lived in places that have no sales tax. There are all these different tactics. They get the money somehow.
Yes.
Right?
They're going to find it somewhere.
Exactly. Now, one thing that I think is worth explaining and it might confuse people is that when we see a budget problem on the federal level, we just experienced this, you see a government shutdown. And that puts a sense of urgency on these lawmakers to get in and do something. But at the state level here in North Carolina, that doesn't happen. Explain that part of it, because we just keep operating on the budget that's in place.
Exactly. Yeah, there is no such thing as a government shutdown in North Carolina. We're just, like you said, operating on the existing budget. So whatever they passed, I think it was actually back in 2023, is currently what's funding the government now. But, we're I think the third fastest growing state in the entire country. The 2023 budget is not going to cut it for 2026. We've added hundreds of thousands of people. There's new schools, new people who need healthcare. And one of really the big pressure points with this is Medicaid. There are more than 3 million North Carolinians who are on Medicaid. And this is the program for low-income people, disabled people. It's basically a third of the state gets their money from this. And that program is slated to run out in either March or April. I actually just a couple of days ago asked the governor's office, okay, do we know exactly when this is going to run out? And they said, no, it's hard to say yet because we don't know how much people are going to spend, how much they're going to the doctor, but it's soon, probably March, maybe or April. Medicaid is going to just run out of money unless the legislature comes in and fixes it. But when is the legislature coming back into session? Also, probably not until March or April.
Explain why. I think this is part of it that people will understand, but there's a part that gets you a little irritated by it.
Yeah, it's because of elections.
Right.
A lot of them have primary elections. Our primaries are coming up in early March. And so they're all hitting the campaign trail right now, or they're hitting the phones, asking people to give them money. They're, going out into their districts, shaking hands, reminding people to please vote for them. And then, they are not in Raleigh because they are out in their districts or they're on the phones with their donors. So they are just focused on their reelection campaign right now.
So instead of doing their job, they're forced to try and keep their job so that they can eventually do it. But why did that time up like that? Why are we in this pinch with the budget during a time that we all knew was coming, that they'd have to run for primaries?
Well, we shouldn't be in this pinch, and you and I, we don't have this conversation every year because normally they figure out a budget before now. The budget was due in July. It's not like we're only a couple of weeks past the date and now the election's screwing things up. It was due in July. We are months past the deadline. And normally they do manage to get it done in time. It might not be, passed by January, but, a lot of times it's September, something like that, which is not too far past the deadline, at least, by the legislature standards. But, now here we are in January, 6 months later, still no budget. And now we're running into election season, which just, it's not normally what happens. And it just goes to show how much bigger the issues are this year.
And that is going to probably irritate people because there are a lot of folks who are waiting for a budget to be passed because they're hoping that there will be things in there that will help them. And I think a lot about teachers only because I have some friends who are neighbors of mine who are teachers, and they're sitting there wondering, are we going to get a pay raise? What's going to happen with our health insurance? What other types of issues are kind of people living in limbo with right now as they wait to see what happens?
Yeah, the Medicaid problem is obviously huge. The lack of raises is huge, and it's for things like, the State Highway Patrol. According to the governor, we are 49th in the country for how much we pay our state troopers and also how much we pay our corrections officers in our prisons. So, when you talk about public safety, we are not really paying enough to attract enough people to those jobs. And you look at it and you see, yeah, there are massive levels of vacancies in state government all over the place. Up and down the board, lots of agencies have 10% of their jobs empty. Some of them have 15 or 20% of their jobs empty. And that's, part of the reason why you see lines out the door at the DMV. It's not just, the state troopers, the teachers. It's, why you see, big factories are years behind being inspected. We don't know if they're, polluting the drinking water or not because they're just operating under inspections that, are years overdue, but that's just kind of how it's got to happen because we don't have enough people.
And when I hear kind of the preface here, like when you think about what the Senate specifically is looking to do, so they want to cut taxes. They also want to cut spending, which doesn't sound like they're looking at giving significant raises to anyone. Is there a bit of a silver lining for anybody in there that's thinking, well, I want somebody who's going to fight for that for me? And here we are in primary season where they actually have an opportunity to put people in place to be the ones that advocate for them during the final push to do a budget.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And silver lining, I think, is the exact right term to use for where we are right now. Like I said, normally the budget has long been decided by now, but the fact that it hasn't means that voters, when their politicians are out in their district trying to get them to vote, are going to have a better chance really than ever to say, okay, do something for me. If you want me to send you back to office, you're going to have to actually deliver on something. And this is what I want. This is what I don't want. And, those discussions might be different county to county, city to city. But it is really a chance for direct democracy right now because a lot of our races aren't going to really be decided in the general election. They're decided in the primary. We have a lot of really deep red seats and a lot of really deep blue seats here in North Carolina. So in a lot of cases, it's going to be just a handful of people, a few thousand people are deciding who actually fills these seats in the House and the Senate.
So I know we have a lot of resources. This is the kind of stuff that you work on a lot to give people an idea of who these candidates are, what they're prioritizing, where can people find that information? If they're listening to this and saying, okay, let me take a look at who's running for representing me and my neighbors. Yeah.
Obviously social media. Everyone uses social media. Politicians also have websites, but really the easiest way that you can figure this out, if this all just seems like an avalanche of information right now, you just go online, look up your voter registration. You just type in your name, you'll pop up, you see yourself there, and then you just scroll down a little bit. It says find your sample ballot, and you can click on that. And it shows you, and especially for the primary, if you're a Republican, you got to vote in the Republican primary. If you're a Democrat, you got to vote in the Democratic primary. But if you're unaffiliated, which the large part of North Carolina voters are, you can actually choose which party you want to vote in. So you can look and see, okay, well, the Democratic Party primaries, I'm not really too interested in any of those candidates, or I don't really care about those races. But the Republican Party, there's a few races in there that I want to vote in, or say, maybe I lean a little bit, to the left, but I live in a red district, or vice versa. So I'm going to choose which primary to vote in because I know that whoever wins this primary is probably going to win the seat.
It's a real blessing here in North Carolina that they allow that, because not every state allows you to do that if you're unaffiliated, to choose which primary you're in. And I always tell people that if they are someone who is more centrist, or they lean in a certain direction that is opposite from the region they live in. And again, there are certain cities that have always been red or blue, but there's also gerrymandering that goes into this. So people get kind of drawn into, I've voted in like 3 different districts since living here.
Right.
And, I tell them, this is a perk. So even if you are strictly aligned with one party or another, if you are a Republican and you are living in a place that always, votes in a Democrat, be unaffiliated and look at the Democrats running in the primary and see which one best aligns with what you are thinking and what you want. I just find that that's a really big perk that hasn't been in every state I've lived in.
Yeah, no, and it's something that I think people are starting to catch on to. For a long time, there weren't really those discussions, like you just mentioned, that kind of strategic voting. But we've been seeing more and more of that. And now, I mean, it's close to 50% of the state is now registered as unaffiliated voters. I mean, it is just skyrocketing popularity because you have that freedom to do exactly what you just said.
So let's talk about deadlines for the primary, and then when are we thinking they will actually convene again and get this budget done? Because, again, they're running for office right now. They want to make sure they have a voice in the process, so they want to get elected first. But then that deadline, especially when it comes to Medicaid, is right behind it.
Yeah, it's going to be tight. I mean, the primary is March 3rd. And so, there's really almost zero chance that they're going to come back into session before then. But, could it be mid to late March, maybe, probably at least by early April they'll be back. There's not really a set date yet. But again, that really matches up with this Medicaid shortfall, which again, we don't have an exact date for that, but it's looking like it's going to be late March, early April around the same time. So they could be really racing to try to get Medicaid done. And to be clear, they didn't have to be in this situation. They could have fixed it in the fall. They could have fixed it in the summer. They could have fixed it in November when Governor Stein actually called a special session of the legislature to fix Medicaid funding. And Republican leaders just said, we're not going to show up for that because we don't think, it's really a big problem and we're going to be back in the spring anyways. Well, now when they're going to be back in the spring kind of coincides with just about the exact date that Medicaid's going to run out of funding. So that, I think, in 2 months from now is going to be a really big issue that we are really going to be possibly even counting the days on.
It's just something that I always try to tell anybody who will let me bore them with it. I'll corner you at a dinner party if you're not careful. But I explain to them the importance of being active in voting for the people who represent you specifically in your area. I know that we live in this world today where national politics and international politics become something that we discuss, and sometimes they actually show up at our front door. So they are very important. But our day-to-day lives, the money that's in your bank account, how much your teachers are being paid, all of these things that are going to have different priority levels for you all get determined by these people who are voted in during these primaries and during these local elections. And it's so important that people pay attention now. We come from the generation of people who lived through COVID, and we know how important our local officials were to that. It was our governors and our local leaders who decided if restaurants stayed open, if people went to work, if you were allowed to mingle or have a wedding or even go to the hospital and see your loved ones. So we know how important that is to know who these local people are making these big decisions. And I think it's so important that people recognize that in a moment like now.
Yeah, and look, here's my pitch for civic responsibility and engagement like you're talking about. You look at the general election, and we usually have 50, 60, 70% turnout. In primaries, like we've got this year coming up, and especially in a midterm, it's going to be 10 or 15% turnout. And so if you are one of those 10 or 15%, your vote is going to matter 5 times more than the people who show up when it's a 60% turnout election. So you really have a chance to make an outsized kind of contribution to your community who represents you.
A journalist who does math. Look at you.
Hey, look at that.
Stop showing off. All right. We appreciate Will. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning into this episode of On the Record. You can find a lot of information about, these primary races and who's running and what they stand for online. We have it on WRL.com. Do your homework out there and let your voice be heard when it comes time to voting. We appreciate you being with us this afternoon.